A car is for travel. A knife is for food. Acid is for science. But for these 6 women, they were tools for the total erasure of a human life. We are analyzing the mechanics of the 6 most calculated wives' revenge deaths ever recorded. This record is for educational and documentary purposes only. We do not condone the violence. We only document the physics of the collapse. Watch the logic of revenge unfold. Clovis, California is defined by its stifling summer heat, a dry, dusty environment where temperatures routinely spike above 100 degrees. But inside the sterile world of the Central California Research Laboratories, the climate was always perfectly controlled. The year was 2003. This was the domain of Larissa Schuster, a highly intelligent biochemist who viewed the world through the cold, rigid lens of formulas and results. To her neighbors, she was a successful professional in a white coat. To her husband, Timothy Schuster, she was a suffocating force of nature. Timothy was a nurse, a man whose profession was built on care and empathy, but at home, he was slowly being crushed by a personality that demanded absolute dominance. By July, their marriage had collapsed into a bitter, high-stakes divorce. Most couples fight over custody or bank accounts in court. Larissa Schuster, however, did not believe in negotiation. She believed in elimination. She looked at her husband and saw a contaminated variable in her life equation that needed to be neutralized. Her revenge would not be a crime of passion involving a gun or a knife. Those were crude tools for amateurs. She was a scientist. She decided to use the laws of chemistry to simply delete him from existence. Her plan was a masterpiece of cold logic and horrific cruelty. She began by acquiring a 55-gallon blue plastic barrel, the kind used for industrial waste. Then, she utilized her professional credentials to stockpile massive quantities of hydrochloric acid. This is a highly corrosive, industrial-grade chemical capable of breaking down organic matter at a molecular level. She did not hide these purchases. She treated them as necessary supplies for a project only she understood. On the night of July 10th, the theoretical plan became a physical reality. Larissa, aided by a manipulated lab assistant, ambushed Timothy at his own home. The attack was swift and tactical. They used a stun gun and chloroform, chemical agents designed to shut down the nervous system. Timothy, a man who spent his life healing others, was incapacitated by the very medical tools he trusted. He was bound, gagged, and transported to a rented self-storage unit on the outskirts of town. It was a concrete box, hot and airless, hidden from the prying eyes of the suburbs. This unit would become the reaction chamber. Inside, they forced Timothy's unconscious body into the blue barrel. He was folded into the tight, dark plastic space. Then, Larissa began the pour. She emptied jug after jug of hydrochloric acid into the drum, covering her husband's body. The science of what happened next is terrifyingly simple. Hydrochloric acid does not burn like fire. It reacts. It initiates a process called acid hydrolysis. The acid attacks the peptide bonds that hold proteins together. Human skin, muscle, and organs are essentially complex protein structures. When submerged in this solution, the chemical bonds snap. The solid tissue begins to lose its structural integrity, turning from solid flesh into a liquid slurry. This reaction is exothermic, meaning it generates its own heat. Inside that sealed barrel, the temperature rose, accelerating the breakdown of biological material. Larissa sealed the lid tight. She left the barrel in the darkness of the storage unit, trusting that the laws of thermodynamics would finish the job. She believed she had created the perfect murder. No body, no autopsy, no crime. She went home, confident that Timothy was no longer a person, but merely a solution of amino acids and waste. For days, the barrel sat in the sweltering heat, the chemical pressure building inside the plastic walls. But Larissa failed to account for the one variable she couldn't control: human guilt. Her accomplice cracked under police interrogation. When detectives finally cut the lock on the storage unit, they were not met with a body, but with a wall of fumes. The smell was overwhelming, acrid, chemical, and unmistakably organic. They found the blue barrel standing alone in the center of the unit. It was heavy. When the hazmat team, dressed in full protective suits and respirators, carefully pried open the lid, they looked into the face of modern evil. The acid had done its work with ruthless efficiency. Timothy Schuster was gone. The soft tissue of his body had been chemically dissociated, turned into a dark, viscous sludge that filled the drum. However, the science had a limit. The acid could dissolve skin and muscle, but it struggled against synthetic materials and hardened keratin. Floating in the horrific liquid were the rubber soles of his boots and his leather belt. These inanimate objects had survived where the human being had perished. It was a scene that required forensic anthropology just to identify the victim. The acid lady, as the press later branded her, had tried to use her intellect to outsmart morality. She thought she could reduce a human life to a chemical equation. Instead, the barrel became a monument to her narcissism. The forensic evidence was irrefutable. The very science she worshipped provided the proof that locked her away. Larissa Schuster was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She remains there today, a woman who thought she could dissolve her problems, only to find that the consequences are solid, permanent, and indestructible. The blue barrel stands in the archives of criminal history not just as a weapon, but as a testament to what happens when a brilliant mind is completely devoid of a human heart. The air in Nassau Bay, Texas, on the evening of July 24, 2002, was thick with the kind of humid, heavy heat that makes everything feel slow and difficult. But inside a silver Mercedes-Benz S430, the environment was a masterpiece of cool, filtered silence. This car was a symbol of total success. It was a 2-ton machine built for luxury, safety, and prestige, weighing over 4,000 pounds of reinforced steel and high-end German engineering. Behind the wheel sat Clara Harris, a high-achieving dentist who had built a life of perfection. She was not a person prone to chaos, but on this night, her world was being dismantled by a single, undeniable fact. Her husband, David Harris, was in the hotel nearby with another woman. To confirm this, Clara had not relied on gut feelings. She had hired Blue Moon Investigations, a private detective agency, to track his every move. When she finally confronted them in the lobby of the Hilton Hotel, the scene was a messy public explosion of domestic anger. Security guards eventually pushed the parties outside into the parking lot, and for a moment the situation seemed to have reached its natural conclusion. But the human brain, under extreme psychological stress, does not always follow a logical path toward de-escalation. Clara got into her Mercedes, the engine humming with a smooth, effortless power. Her teenage stepdaughter, Lindsay, sat in the passenger seat, a terrified witness to the shift in Clara's reality. Through the wide, expensive windshield, Clara saw David walking toward his own car. He was out in the open, vulnerable on the flat black asphalt. In that second, the Mercedes stopped being a vehicle and became a weapon of crushing mass. Clara did not hesitate. She shifted the transmission into drive and pressed her foot to the floor. The V8 engine responded instantly, launching the 2-ton sedan forward with terrifying momentum. David Harris had no time to move. The laws of physics are indifferent to human emotion, and when that much steel hits a human body at speed, the result is mathematically certain. The car struck David, the impact throwing him several feet through the air. A normal hit and run ends with the driver fleeing, but what happened next was a cold, repetitive cycle of destruction. Clara did not drive away. Instead, she turned the steering wheel hard, utilizing the wide open space of the lot to create a tight orbital path. She drove over him a second time. The Mercedes is equipped with a sophisticated air suspension system designed to smooth out bumps in the road. which meant that, from inside the cabin, the act of crushing a human being felt like nothing more than a minor vibration. Witnesses, including the private investigators who were recording the entire event on video, watched in horror as the silver car circled back again. She drove over him a third time. This was not a quick accident. It was a methodical application of force. The tires, designed for high-performance grip, transferred the vehicle's massive weight directly onto the victim's chest and abdomen. In forensic terms, this caused massive blunt force trauma and catastrophic mechanical compression of the thoracic cavity. The skeletal structure of the rib cage simply could not withstand the dynamic load of 4,000 pounds of metal passing over it repeatedly. Each pass resulted in further internal displacement and fatal organ failure. Inside the car, the only sounds were the muffled engine and the screams of the girl in the passenger seat, but Clara remained focused on the loop. After the third pass, she finally brought the heavy machine to a stop. She parked the car in a way that left the body pinned beneath the wheels, the ultimate gesture of total dominance and finality. The engine continued to idle quietly, its cooling fans whirring in the Texas heat as if nothing had happened. When the police arrived, they found a crime scene that looked more like a construction accident than a domestic dispute. The forensic evidence was undeniable because it had been captured in real time by the very detectives Clara had hired to prove her husband's infidelity. They had the video of the silver Mercedes circling its prey like a shark. During the trial, the inertia of 3 tons became a central point of the prosecution. They argued that the repetitive nature of the driving proved a clear, calculated intent to destroy. Clara Harris was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Her case remains a chilling study in how a symbol of safety can be inverted into a tool of absolute lethality. The Mercedes-Benz S430 performed its job perfectly. It protected the occupant inside while obliterating the obstacle in its path. It was a tragedy of mass and momentum, where the cooling air of a luxury interior couldn't hide the heat of a revenge that had turned cold and mechanical. Today, that Hilton parking lot is just another piece of pavement. But for those who know the history, it is the place where the laws of physics were used to execute a final, crushing sentence. Houston, Texas is a place where the suburbs feel like a fortress of quiet, middle-class safety. And in January 2003, no street felt more peaceful than White Oak Court. This was the home of Susan and Jeff Wright, a couple that seemed to represent the perfect American life. Susan was young, blonde, and stayed at home with the children, while Jeff was the provider. But the true story of their lives was hidden inside the master bedroom, a place the family called the Blue Room because of its calm, sky-blue walls. In the world of architecture, a bedroom is a sanctuary, but in the world of physics, it is a contained space where trust can be turned into a trap. On the night of January 13th, Susan Wright decided to stop being a wife and start being a cold operator of a lethal process. The plan began with a simple deception designed to lower Jeff's biological defenses. She convinced him to let her tie him to the bed as part of a game, a request that used his own confidence against him. She used silk neckties and bathrobe sashes, materials that were soft to the touch but possessed high tensile strength. When Jeff's hands and feet were secured to the 4 corners of the bed frame, his range of motion was reduced to 0. He had no leverage. He was no longer a man with the ability to defend himself. He had become a stationary biological target. This is the moment where the story shifts from a domestic drama into a mechanical horror. Susan did not use a high-tech weapon or a complicated device. She reached for a simple kitchen knife, a tool designed for the mundane task of preparing food. What followed was a phenomenon that forensic experts call overkill, but for a fatalist observer, it was a study in repetitive kinetic energy. Susan began a cycle of motion that defied human emotion. She struck him 193 times. This number is difficult for the human mind to process. It means her arm moved back and forth in a rhythmic, reciprocating kinetic strokes for several minutes without stopping. To do this, a person must move past anger and into a state of mechanical automation. She became a biological machine, a piston firing over and over. Each strike was a calculated breach of the body's protective layers. The blade caused multiple instances of penetrating trauma, cutting through the skin and muscle with the same indifference as a factory tool. As the strikes continued, Jeff's internal systems began to experience a total failure. The lungs were compromised by multiple punctures, leading to a loss of internal air pressure. The cardiovascular system suffered a catastrophic drop in volume, as the systemic fluid volume was rapidly lost of the network of veins and arteries. This led to a state of acute blood loss that effectively shut down the brain's ability to function. Inside the Blue Room, the only sound was the heavy, rhythmic thud of the knife and the sound of Susan's breathing. There was no conversation. There was no mercy. There was only the sound of a system being dismantled piece by piece. The blue walls, which were supposed to bring peace, were now the boundaries of a slaughterhouse. When the mechanical motion finally stopped, the silence that returned to the house was absolute. The human element had been completely erased, leaving only a forensic puzzle behind. But Susan's work was not finished. She moved from the act of destruction to the act of disposal with the same cold logic. She dragged the body out of the Blue Room and into the backyard, a task that required immense physical effort. She'd already dug a shallow grave in the dirt, a hole waiting for the remains of her marriage. She buried him there, under the Texas soil, and then went back inside to clean. She used industrial-strength chemicals to scrub the mattress and the floor, trying to reset the environment and remove every trace of what had happened. She wanted to return the Blue Room to its state of suburban perfection. However, the laws of evidence are as stubborn as the laws of physics. Months later, the body was found. During the trial, the most shocking piece of evidence was the bed frame itself, which was brought into the courtroom. The jury sat in silence as they looked at the heavy furniture, realizing the total helplessness of the victim. The prosecution focused on the number 193, arguing that no person acts in self-defense nearly 200 times. That is the count of a person who has switched off their humanity. Susan Wright was convicted of murder and sentenced to prison. Today, the house on White Oak Court stands as a normal home, but the story of the Blue Room remains a chilling lesson. It shows us that the most dangerous force in the world isn't a machine made of steel, but a human mind that has decided to act like one. Once the repetitive cycle of revenge begins, it does not stop until the target is completely and irreversibly unmade. Vienna, Austria, is a city built on a foundation of elegance, famous for its classical music and the sweet, sugary air of its pastry shops. But in the district of Währing, that sweetness once covered a cold, industrial secret. On the surface, Estibaliz Carranza was the perfect success story. She was a petite, charming woman who owned an ice cream parlor called Schleckeria. To the local families, she was the ice cream lady, a friendly face who spent her days serving colorful scoops of gelato. But beneath the bright storefront lay a basement, defined by heavy shadows and the constant vibrating hum of massive industrial freezers. This basement was not just for storage. It was a site of mechanical disposal where human lives were managed like spoiled inventory. In 2008, her husband, Holger Holtz, had become an obstacle to her plans for a new life. He refused to leave their shared apartment. And to a mind that functions on the logic of removal, he was a variable that needed to be deleted. One afternoon, while the shop remained open above, she took a .22 caliber Beretta and neutralized the problem. The projectile entered the back of his head, causing instant fatal neurological trauma. To Carranza, this was not an emotional tragedy. It was the start of a logistical challenge. She moved the remains to the basement, a world governed by the loud, rhythmic thumping of industrial compressors and refrigeration units. These machines provided more than just cold. They provided an acoustic shroud of white noise. Under the cover of this mechanical roar, she began the anatomical dissociation of the remains. She used a chainsaw, a tool designed for cutting wood, to reduce the biological mass into manageable sections. The vibration of the saw mirrored the vibration of the ice cream machines above, creating a symphony of industrial labor that hid a process of clinical destruction. This was the ultimate betrayal of a safe space, a place of childhood happiness, serving as a cover for a gruesome engineering project. To prevent the inevitable scent of organic decay, she used the tools of the construction trade. She placed the sections into plastic tubs and flower pots, then mixed large quantities of concrete. Chemistry was her primary ally. Concrete is a material that, through a chemical reaction called hydration, creates a permanent, airtight seal. She poured the heavy gray sludge over the containers, effectively fossilizing the evidence beneath the floor of her own business. For 2 years, she walked over that floor every day, serving vanilla and chocolate cones, while her secret remained locked in stone. In 2010, the pattern repeated. Her new lover, Manfred Hinterberger, also failed to meet her expectations. Again, the Beretta was fired. Again, the basement machinery hummed. Again, the chainsaw roared, and more concrete was mixed in the dark. She was a master of logistics, integrating murder into the operational flow of her business. She lived in a world of stone and silence, confident that her secrets were part of the building's foundation. But the physical world is governed by laws that eventually demand a reckoning. In June 2011, a routine maintenance task led to a discovery that the concrete could not hide. Plumbers were not looking for a crime. They were looking for a leak in the building's pipes. When they broke through a false wall in the basement with jackhammers, they struck something that was not brick or earth. They found the plastic tubs. The air, which had been stagnant for years, was suddenly filled with the heavy weight of the past. The forensic recovery was a slow, agonizing process of chipping away at hardened stone to reveal the biological artifacts hidden within. The stone had preserved the evidence perfectly. Estibaliz Carranza fled to Italy as the news broke, but she was quickly captured and returned to Vienna. During her trial, clinical profiling described her as a woman with a personality as cold as the product she sold. She was sentenced to life in a specialized psychiatric prison. Today, the Schleckeria shop is gone, its colorful sign removed, and its basement filled with the silence of a closed police file. The story of the ice cream killer remains a chilling testament to the industrialization of revenge. It is a reminder that the machines we use for comfort and pleasure can also be the perfect accomplices for a mind that has traded empathy for engineering. The coldness of the gelato was nothing compared to the coldness of the woman who served it, proving that even the thickest layer of concrete eventually cracks under the pressure of the truth. The mechanical hum of the world continues, but for Carranza, the machines finally went silent. Sacramento, California, is a place where the sun bakes the earth into a fine dust, a landscape defined by its sprawling vineyards and the high-stakes world of professional horse shows. In 2001, this world was ruled by Larry McNabney, a wealthy and successful trial lawyer who seemed to have everything. He was charismatic, rich, and married to a beautiful woman named Elisa. To the public, they were the ultimate power couple, often seen traveling in their luxury silver Jaguar to prestigious equestrian events across the country. But behind the polished image, Elisa McNabney was a woman built on a foundation of total deception. Her real name was Lauren Sims. She was a professional con artist with a long criminal history of identity theft and fraud. To her, Larry was not a husband to be loved, but a biological bank account with a shelf life that was about to expire. The tragedy of this case is not found in a sudden explosion of violence, but in the terrifying, slow-motion erasure of a human being. Elisa chose a method of revenge that was cold, calculated, and utilized the tools of the horse world she had infiltrated. She acquired xylazine, a powerful non-opioid sedative used by veterinarians to tranquilize massive animals like horses. In a 1,200-pound horse, it causes deep sedation. In a human being, it acts as a chemical shutdown switch that works with agonizing slowness. On September 10, 2001, during a horse show in Nebraska, Elisa introduced the drug into Larry's system. This was the moment of the ultimate safety betrayal. Larry trusted his wife to care for him, but instead, he was now hosting a foreign agent that began to systematically dismantle his central nervous system. Larry did not die instantly. Instead, his body entered a state of profound depression. His heart rate slowed to a crawl. His blood pressure dropped. His muscles became useless, leaving him in a state of chemical paralysis, while his mind was still flickering inside. Elisa, with the help of a young assistant she had manipulated, moved Larry's limp but living body into the trunk of his own Jaguar. This is where the story shifts into a study of time dilation and psychological horror. For the next several days, Elisa drove that luxury car across the American West, traveling from Nebraska all the way back to California. Larry McNabney was Livy Cargo. He was trapped in the dark carpeted void of the trunk, drifting in and out of consciousness while the world continued to turn just inches away. Elisa did not hide in the shadows. She stopped at busy horse shows, ate at crowded diners, and chatted with friends, all while her husband was slowly dying in the back of the vehicle. The clinical reality of this journey is grim. Inside the trunk, Larry was experiencing the progressive stages of multi-organ failure. The xylazine caused severe respiratory depression, meaning his brain was slowly being starved of oxygen. Because his heart could no longer pump blood with enough force, his kidneys began to fail. This is a process of slow internal collapse. The consciousness does not vanish all at once. It fades like a dying battery in the dark. In the heat of the day, the temperature inside the trunk rose, adding the stress of extreme heat to his already failing systems. To a fatalist observer, the Jaguar was no longer a car. It was a mobile prison where a human life was being extinguished over the course of hundreds of miles. Elisa eventually arrived back in California, and by the time she reached the San Joaquin Valley, the biological process was complete. Larry's heart had finally stopped somewhere on the long stretch of highway. Elisa did not show panic. She took the body to a quiet vineyard, a place known for growth and life. Using the same cold logic she had used during the drive, she dug a shallow hole between the rows of grapevines and buried him in the dirt. She then spent the next several months living off his money and telling everyone that Larry had simply walked away from his life to start over. But the earth eventually gives up its secrets. In January 2002, field workers discovered the remains, and the forensic investigation began to piece together the timeline of his disappearance. They found the traces of xylazine in his tissues, a chemical footprint that led directly back to the horse tranquilizers Elisa had used. The live cargo case shocked the public because of the sheer duration of the victim's journey. Elisa was eventually captured in Florida after a nationwide manhunt, but she would never face a jury. While awaiting trial in her jail cell, she opted for a permanent, self-initiated cessation of her biological functions rather than facing the consequences of her mechanical cruelty. Today, the vineyard in California remains a peaceful place, but the memory of what happened there is a chilling reminder of the relationship between human rage and the passage of time. The Jaguar, once a symbol of success, became the mechanical witness to a slow and silent erasure. It proves that the most terrifying tragedies are not always sudden. Sometimes they are a long, dark road where a person is forced to wait for their own inevitable end while the world moves on without them. Syracuse, New York, is a region defined by its punishing gray winters, a place where the survival of every household depends on the constant maintenance of machines and the heavy use of industrial chemicals to keep the world from freezing over. In the quiet town of Clay, the year was 2005, and the local community saw Stacey Castor as a woman of tragic misfortune. She had already buried her first husband, Michael Wallace, years earlier, and now she was mourning her second, David Castor. To the neighbors, she was a grieving widow. To the cold eye of a forensic investigator, she was a master of a specific chemical type of execution. The weapon of choice was not found in a gun safe or a kitchen drawer, but in a plastic jug stored in every garage, ethylene glycol, commonly known as antifreeze. This is a technical fluid designed to lower the freezing point of an engine's cooling system, but when it enters the human bloodstream, it triggers a catastrophic and irreversible systemic failure. Stacey Castor did not act in a moment of sudden passion. Her revenge against the men in her life was a study in slow, calculated biological sabotage. She utilized the safety betrayal perfectly, bringing her husband's drinks that they believed were intended to help them feel better. Instead, she was introducing a foreign agent that would turn their own internal organs against them. The science of antifreeze poisoning is a nightmare of microscopic geometry. Once the liquid is ingested, the liver processes the ethylene glycol, breaking it down into glycolic acid and oxalic acid. This causes the blood's pH balance to shift into a lethal acidic range. The most destructive phase occurs in the renal system. The oxalic acid reacts with the calcium in the victim's blood to form calcium oxalate crystals. These are not soft or liquid. They are solid, needle-like shards of mineral matter that begin to circulate through the kidneys. They do not just block the system, they physically shred the delicate filters of the body from the inside out. Over the course of several days, the victim's ability to process waste stops entirely. They experience a slow descent into a coma as the brain is poisoned by the body's own metabolic waste. Stacey watched this happen twice, acting with the detachment of a scientist monitoring a laboratory test. When David Castor became too weak to drink on his own, she used a turkey baster to force the poison down his throat, a mechanical intervention that bypassed his fading survival instincts. But the true depth of her character was revealed when the police began to find the common thread in both deaths. Stacey realized that she was the primary variable in a mounting criminal investigation. To protect herself, she attempted the ultimate psychological pivot. She attempted to neutralize the primary witness by inducing a deep chemical coma, typed a pre-scripted final statement. She wanted the world to believe that her daughter was the killer. This was her final play, to reset the board and walk away clean. However, even the most cold-blooded plan can be undone by a single, tiny error. In the typed confession, Stacey made a linguistic mistake that no forensic program could ignore. She spelled the word antifreeze as anti-free. It was the exact same unique misspelling that police had found in her own written statements and interviews. This linguistic artifact was the open loop that destroyed her defense. Forensic technicians analyzed the computer's internal clock and proved the note was written while Ashley was already deep in a chemically induced coma. The forensic zoom into the physical evidence revealed that the turkey baster found in the trash contained both David's DNA and the green residue of the engine fluid. The clinical shield of the investigation was absolute. In 2009, Stacey Castor was convicted of murder and the attempted murder of her own child. She was sentenced to 51 years to life. She was a woman who saw the people around her as components in a machine that she could turn off whenever they became an inconvenience. She died in prison in 2016, a final, unceremonious shutdown of a life lived through the logic of elimination. Today, her case is taught as a masterclass in toxicological revenge. It serves as a grim reminder that the most dangerous substances in our lives are often the ones we keep in our garages. And the most dangerous people are often the ones who offer us a glass of something sweet when we are at our most vulnerable. The green fluid in the jug remains a silent witness to the fact that biology is just a complex series of filters, and all it takes to break a human being is a handful of invisible, jagged crystals. Every one of these perfect plans failed because of a single tiny human error. Looking at the forensic data, which of these 6 women was a master of logic, and which was just a malfunctioning machine? If you were the investigator, which detail would have made you look twice at the grieving widow? Argue your case in the comments. Subscribe to join the cold observation. Like this video to keep the data flowing.